Good afternoon and welcome to the Takeup. Today we have episode 213, Making Money with Machine Embroidery, Segments, Styles, and Profiles Revisited. Hello, folks, and welcome into the Take Up this afternoon. Happy to have you here on this wonderful educational Friday. Hopefully, we can get to some good talk about things that are maybe a little bit more in the business space today. You guys know that sometimes I get into the business side. Mostly I do a lot of talk about digitizing and technicality and embroidery, and we're definitely going to talk about more of that coming up. I think no matter where you are on this spectrum, though, knowing a little bit about how we value what we do and what we are talking about when we talk about working on the business, not just in the business, not just making the needles move up and down, can be valuable for all of us. And frankly, can be valuable for us just to value what we do, even if we are people in the prosumer or even the hobbyist space who think at any time, hey, what would it be like to make this a thing that I get paid for, to make this my work? Well, I'm going to talk a lot about those sorts of things today. What did I say I was talking about? The segments and styles and profiles revisited. Well, why am I saying revisited? Number one, I've done this many times and talked about this various kind of definitions that it comes into to figure out styles of embroidery shops, what we're doing, the profiles of the people who we're selling to. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about how people set up shops, what kind of embroiderers there are out there, and I'm going to get into some concepts even about how we make money in the business of embroidery, in the community of embroidery, rather than just with our embroidery. My primary work, as you guys know, was commercial. I started out and did most of my work in a commercial space where I was often doing things in a very business to business way. Certainly, we did stuff directly for consumers and customers and people who wanted the artistry done directly for them in ways that were not in promotional business. But a lot of this stuff is, promotional products, sports clubs, and the rest. It was custom embroidery done specifically for that end. And we're going to talk about that for sure. So we'll talk about the difference between that and things like monogramming and the bridal market. And there's all sorts of stuff that's different. So we're going to be talking about all those different things and all those definitions. So it'll be about shop setups, how the shops are put together, why people get into equipment the way they do to some degree. We'll certainly talk about the different definitions of shops and how they're often discussed. The style of business you do. You already heard me say B2B, so business to business versus business to consumer. And there's definitely a lot of play around that. And the other thing I'm going to do, as I give you all these definitions and divisions and places where you can make little lines to cut things apart and say, this is where a shop belongs, this is where I belong, I'm also going to tear them down at the same time, because frequently what you're going to find out is these are false divisions in between types of shops, types of embroiderers also, and digitizers. You will find that I often have fought for the concept of people who are on the prosumer, and I'm going to define that and work with you on that again, as being professional and understanding that our best method is not necessarily to chop these so finely, but to say, how can we all be good stewards of this thing, this craft we call embroidery, and making sure that it all pays off for us, whether that pays off creatively or monetarily. So I'm going to talk about all that stuff and get into it, because as I'm going into the teaching season again, I'm about to travel out to Long Beach. You guys know I'm going out to Impressions Expo in Long Beach to teach, which is really kind of the big show. That is the big show in the US, Long Beach in California, doing Impressions Expo for the commercial decoration market. And obviously, tons of print of all kinds, from screen print and classic stuff to DTF and sublimation and every manner of printing method that's out there, but also where the premium embroidery stuff is going to be happening. As I go out there, some of the chatter that I get is also about, hey, is this a show for people who are in this space? Is this where I should go? Or which show is for people who are semi-pros or people who work from their third bedroom or what have you? And I get a lot of comments about what is a pro or a commercial embroiderer? What is this kind of embroiderer versus that kind of embroiderer? Who is really a pro? Who is not? Who's a hobbyist? Who's not? And what does that mean? And I think we're going to get into that a bit today to just bring out not only what the definitions might be that you're hearing, but an understanding of where those come from, why people are concerned about that, and what does it mean to you when you start thinking about, as I talked about last week, the education you're going to get or where you want to be. I think, honestly, What we've learned over time is, like a lot of things in the world, they are not little boxes that everything fits into. Frankly, this is a spectrum, and you may fit on that spectrum somewhere that is not wholly in one spot or another. I certainly don't fit in one spot or another, never have. So you'll find yourself somewhere in that spectrum, and it will be more about your goals, what you want your embroidery to do for you, your digitizing to do for you, if that's the part of that you're in for today, uh, and who you want to market to, or if you want to market at all. Certainly, that's a thing. If you're a complete and total hobbyist, artist, crafter, then you might be outside of this. But if you've ever had the feeling of, hey, do I belong at these spaces? Do I want to go to these places? I'll tell you more about it. And as I'm doing that, I might tell you a little bit more about things like the impression show, so you understand what's going to be out there and what's in it for you, if that's something you want to go to, or what these shows are like. And then you'll understand a little bit more about, also, when you do hear people talk about prosumers, when you do hear people talk about the difference between a hobbyist, or whether they like or dislike the idea of hobbyists being in commercial spaces, or vice versa, what that means and why that stuff comes up. But before I do, like I said, we're going to get into that. So when we get there, that's really what we're on about. This is the topic for today, like how people are making money in a machine embroidery, what kind of segments there are, what kind of styles of shops there are, customer profiles. We'll talk a little bit about that. And that's more about how we market. We may not get deeply into that. So we're not going to go crazy on marketing today. Hopefully we might talk about that a little bit. Certainly I'll share a little bit about that. But for now, let's start with this. We're going to say hi to the people who are here. If you are here live, you guys know that if you make live comments, I like to answer those live comments. If you are not here live, you're on the replay squad, by all means, go ahead, fast forward to the content, get to where it goes. I'll pop banners back up to let you know. You'll see me get past the comments. But for now, if you're here and you're contributing, I want to say hi to you guys. So let's talk to everybody who's here. Cindy's saying she can't be here for live one to say hi. So glad she said hi to everybody from Odessa, Texas. Cold afternoon, cold here in Albuquerque, New Mexico too. Not cold like some people know cold. I know I'll get that that complication if I say that, but yes, definitely cold out today. Lots to see from everybody here, but I understand it's definitely cold for us here. B from Australia coming in, sunny South Australia. Everybody saying hi to each other. Love that. Al's coming in from New Jersey. Love to see that too. Comments are popping a little slow today. Sorry, folks. Got lots of folks saying hi. Rhonda's in saying hi to everybody. We got DJ Kev coming in. Love to see you here from snowy North Carolina. Hopefully everybody's taking care. And by the way, I do know for all of you who are out in Southern California, we are keeping you in our thoughts and prayers, people who are suffering from the fires all around LA. And we know that some of our favorite people who are here all the time have been suffering out there. We are definitely thinking about you and want you to know that you are in our thoughts as you deal with the horrors of that fire down there. We certainly understand it out here in New Mexico. We get wildfires, but usually not in the middle of the city like you guys are doing now. So do take care, and everybody keep some kind thoughts out there for the firefighters. You can see there's a lot of firefighter patches on the wall behind me. Some of them for movies and TV, but some of them for the real deal. Certainly we did plenty of fire resistant thread for you folks, and I have got you in my mind today. Lots of other folks saying hi today. Identity Threads, you're coming in from Kenosha, Wisconsin. Lots of family up there for me, so I hope you guys are doing all right and staying warm. Jessica coming in from a very snowy Central Arkansas with 11 inches to shovel. That is wild. Certainly something I'm glad I'm not doing. I hope you're doing all right. Minnesota, we've got Barb coming in from North Central Minnesota saying hi to everybody. Love that. And there's Doug. Yeah, I hope, Doug, you are doing all right from the West Hills out there in California, right around LA where that fire is going on. Do take care, sir. Glad that you're doing all right and got to go back to your house. Lisa is back here saying happy Friday. Wonderful educator, my compatriot over at Brilliance, saying happy Friday, everyone. Another great topic for the Takeup. I'd love to hear that, because I know some of these, there have been times where people are like, hey, digitizer boy, get back in your cage there, man. Do the thing you're supposed to do and teach us how to make stuff. And I'm going to do that, but trust me, I've been doing this as long as I've been doing the digitizing portion of it. The business portion of it's baked in for me. So I got a couple of things to say that are worthwhile. AJ coming in from Education Saturday Morning. I stand corrected. From the Gold Coast. Aussie. Happy to have you in. Hope you answered correctly to that one. But yeah, another great year ahead for leveling up. Love it. I'm glad to be leveling up with you. And be looking forward to this one. All right. I'm glad to hear that. Like I said, sometimes people get on me for doing the business ones. They're like, man, I want to know about did other stuff. I want to work on that. Oh, and here, I'm going to pop this up before we get into the further stuff. DJ Kev coming in, love this. Just FYI, not on topic. Hey, man, I'm here to get derailed. This is about you guys. I've been testing a lot on small lettering with text 10 threads, 6580 needle. Amazing stuff. Absolutely, man. Small needles, small threads, small text, great stuff. Just manage your texture. If you can manage your texture, you can go absolutely like 25% smaller than with 40-weight thread. We'll do another small lettering topic here soon. And now that I've got a test bed machine that makes that a little easier in-house again in the office, I may you may see me mess around a little bit. I got to get some fine needles, fine threads, maybe haul out the 75 weight super tiny stuff again and play with it. But yeah, we'll talk about that again, DJ Kev. You're not off topic that far. We're never far from digitizing here, even if I'm talking business. You know I'm going to get back to it. I can't leave it alone. All right, folks. So let's go ahead and get into the topic itself because I'd like to be expedient, get you guys back into it. So, and like I said, this is one of those topics we talked about this last week about education. This is definitely an on the business topic. Yes, there be some in the business stuff, things we have to actually do, some actions to take. But I'm talking a little bit about working on the business and understanding the markets around you and what's going on in general. So admittedly, if you're here just to hear about like, hey, Eric, how do I do small lettering or applique or something else? This probably isn't your episode. We'll be getting back to that. Don't you worry. I can't leave that stuff alone. There'll be more technical stuff that, and hey, I've got 200 plus of these before me if you want to go check one of those out. But today we're going to talk about some on the business stuff. So talking about what the business is, and that is under this topic, making money in machine embroidery, and obviously segments, styles, profiles. We're going to define some of that stuff and talk about it. But as part of this, which is different from the last time that I had this as a show on the Takeup, there'll be a little moment of talking about what it is to make money with your machine embroidery and digitizing, and what is it to make money in machine embroidery. As you guys know, working for Embrilliance now, I am helping to make products that are sold into the embroidery industry. And that's the same kind of thing as people who want to make stock designs, who want to make stock fonts. That is another way that you can take your embroidery knowledge and make money inside of this industry. The thing is, then you have to still think about audience. The same way I'm talking about segments, the segments are different between, are you pitching this to people who are using their software and their tools to make money? And what segment do they work in and serve? Which people are in their audience? What kinds of people do they serve? This is still important, even if you're trying to make money in the business of embroidery, kind of like I do now. You still have to know about where people are and who they are trying to serve to do it. So I'm going to argue that even if you're someone who's like, no, I'm more in the craft side of this thing, and maybe I sell a couple designs or I make things for other embroiderers, understanding what kind of shops are out there, understanding where their pain points are, and knowing what an audience for them looks like, this is really defining your own audience and helping you to understand what you need to do to serve that audience. So I think there's a little bit of with versus in. So we're talking obviously about making money with our embroidery in the world, but it's also in machine embroidery. So in the world of machine embroidery, it's also a place where we can use our style and use our knowledge to serve that. And we can have different styles of businesses and different executions to make that happen. So it's worthwhile to kind of think about that. I think that's in general something that you should kind of figure out is say, hey, there's an audience that's specific to me. There is a place that I'm working toward. And what am I going to do to serve that audience? That's a big deal. However, it's also about your setup. So let's talk a little bit about that. I said, segments and styles and profiles. What does that mean? Well, segments, when I'm talking about segments, usually that is market segments. These are defined audiences. Now, these defined audiences can be of different styles, or of different types. It doesn't necessarily mean any one type. We could say we could define it by something demographic, like age blocks or gender, or, political basis, whatever. We could do that if we want to. Often these are categories of interest. I find that is something I use more often, interest categories, and I'm going to talk about that later for niche marketing. When we're talking about a segment, it is people who have a certain kind of interest or a certain kind of need that we can group together and say, here is an audience for my work. That's when I talk about segments. So we might talk a little bit about those, maybe define some of those as far as more broad segments of categories of people who need a certain kind of work. But usually we go deeper to that and say, all right, no, this is also a particular market segment. For someone like me, business to business, where I did most of my work serving other businesses, you might say, okay, well, a defined audience out of that, certainly the larger audience being business to business. I'm going to make promotional stuff in uniforming and things like that that's going to be for other businesses. But then I might also define a smaller segment and say, all right, I'm going to serve people in the restaurant industry. So I'm going to learn a lot about the kind of garments they need, the kind of decoration they like, the thread that's going to serve that the best. And then I'm going to have that design style as well, kind of on lock, know what I'm doing, lock in, say, I know what it is that, and you could even go further down and say, okay, brew pubs. I'm going to put out advertisement that markets to brew pubs, and I'm going to know everything about that little market, that niche, so that I can serve that segment. Now, there's also other kinds of segments you could be in. It's not necessarily that segment or one type of business. It can also be the way you serve your actual output. You could say, all right, I'm going to do sports ordering, sure, but my segment is people who want to order online and get individual direct to customer work. And now then it is more B2C instead of B2B. But this is still saying, here's a type of garment, a type of decoration that I'm going to do, and I'm going to angle what I do in my knowledge toward that market segment. And they can be broad, they can be fine. When you go down to niche markets, those are those very defined small segments. And I think that there are different types of shops that end up going toward one specific segment or who will serve a number of segments. I think most custom embroidery shops, even smaller prosumer shops, you're going to serve multiple segments. You're going to serve different groups of people, but understanding that these exist and thinking about who it is you're serving is still important nonetheless. I will say this, though, if you think your audience is everybody, and if you think your specialty is everything, then your audience is nobody and your specialty is nothing. You have to, at the very least, present yourself with certain specialties to stand out. You do need to present yourself with the idea that you serve a certain method or a certain need for people. I think that's worthwhile to say. Will you take on jobs outside of a certain defined style or segment? Absolutely, you will. When you are looking to market yourself, it's probably more valuable to have a concept of who's there and what's going on with that. So there's segments, styles, and profiles. When I talk about styles, there's two different things that are going on there. Styles in this case, in the business sense, when I said it, at least for the definition of this particular show, I'm kind of talking about your decoration focus to a degree. So when I say B2B versus B2C, that's some of it, but it also is, am I doing it can also be something that's like corporate decoration versus team sports versus something else. Now, certainly a lot of it is also whether I'm doing custom decoration where everything's bespoke. We'll talk about that again in a second, versus decoration that relies more on personalization stock. So that's like the gift market. We're going to talk about those markets again in a second and give you more of that segment stuff. We're going to define some of those even further. And when I talk about profiles, so the last word in that trio from the title, profiles are defined customer personalities. And when we're trying to figure out our audience or really get down to deeper marketing of what we're trying to say, let's say in social media posts, in literal advertisements, wherever we want to place those, what we're getting down to is often trying to speak to an audience. And it can be very helpful for us to envision a customer profile where we're literally defining the personality of a customer. So let's say, for the sake of this particular argument, I talked about brew pubs earlier. I'll say, all right, well, who are the kind of people who in my region own these brew pubs? How do I access who they are? How do they live? How old do I think they are? What do these kind of things, and say, where do these people go find their information from? How can I address that? What are their pain points? What does that person's day look like? You envision a literal person who's your buyer, and then abstract that out a little bit and say, I'm going to try and tailor my message to tell this person. I'm like, hey, you're a person who's got a lot of money sunk into this thing, but you want it to look very professional. And here I am in the places where you consume media telling you that I've got the thing you need to look professional and to make people have this certain feeling about your brew pub. And also, I'm showing you that I have this professional acumen, but that I also understand what your day-to-day life is like, because I have garments that you need and I have decorations in a style that you are likely to enjoy. And that is me saying, all right, I'm going to imagine the buyer from the brew pub. I'm going to imagine who that person is in my region and then try and serve an advertisement or a message or show a sample that is something that they might like. And it can be helpful for us if we're not really sure about who we're marketing to try and imagine those people, the actual buyer on the other end. Who is the buyer? And also, who's the buyer I want? Right? Who's the buyer that's going to make the most sense for my business? And that's another thing we can do. But that's where, when we're talking about profiles, that's customer profiles. That's what I'm thinking about with profiles. But when we're getting into style, I talked about decoration focus. That can also, the style of shop can also be something like whether or not you have a smaller shop with, or a single head or single head fleet where we have multiple single head machines and there for a certain thing where you have multi-head machines, or you have a contract larger shop. We can talk about that too. But admittedly, when I say style, know that there is always going to be me saying the word style when I talk about different kinds of samples and products that we make, where we're also talking about the type and the character of a decoration. The classic word style, like, hey, I've got this very, psychedelic style text on my hat. That's still a style thing. Obviously, we're going to talk about that as well. But when I'm talking about it as far as the decoration focus, it's more like, am I set up to serve businesses or individual people? And what does that mean? What kind of segment am I in? And how do I set myself up to do that kind of stuff? So I think that's all of that. It can be valuable to see, right? I think it's one of those things. It is useful to think about that stuff because it can help us to understand how we want to set ourselves up and what the strengths and weaknesses are of the way we set ourselves up, both with our equipment and how we market ourselves and how we skill up. What are the things we learn? What are the places where we spend our time trying to figure out more about those customers, that audience, and what do we need to do? So it really depends, right? It really depends. Now I've got a couple of comments here, so I like to jump in and grab those comments before I get on to the next kind of thrust of this segment here. But let's talk to Identity Thread says, embroidery is fun. Making money with embroidery is way more fun. I think so. I like doing it. Plus, I also love that we do kind of let people identify things. You guys know that I take embroidery too seriously sometimes. I think it is how we show our affiliations. We kind of literally wear our heart on our sleeve. We show where we belong. Yes, you might say, oh, wearing the logo from your company doesn't do that. In an ideal world where you're working for a company that has a larger purpose that you're on board with, then it is. And you can be proud of where you work and proud of what you do. Then it does kind of help us show, even in this space that's very commercial, where you belong, who you ride with, what is important to you. And especially as we get into embroidery for causes, embroidery for groups, the teams that you belong to, hey, if you're religious, the church you go to, I guess. I don't know that a lot of people do that. I do see people wearing more church merch sometimes, depending on where you're at in the world. Whoever it is, whatever it is you belong to, it could be political, could be whatever, it could be anything, could be a fandom. If it's stuff that you buy that's commercial, now we got to be more careful. Custom decorators can't make a lot of that stuff because copyright. But all those things show who you are and who you belong to, and I think that's something that's wonderful. We get to express ourselves with it, and some of it's just self-expression. Hey, that's always a possibility, especially if you're doing personalization and gift stuff, or you're doing bespoke decoration for somebody else who has a line where they're expressing themselves, where they're expressing an ethos or showing what they belong to. And those are all possibilities too. But yeah, I do like that. And I think it's wonderful. Ron says, good day, y'all. Didn't think there's an episode. Yeah, I had some problems with my posting today. One of my methods of posting broke down. And so I did not know that a lot of my promotional posts didn't go out. So for those of you here, thank you. Thank you for being here. We had some problems with that one. And then Lisa says, we have met quite a few tag team prosumer embroidery businesses. Hats for sports, referring to the baby expert or wedding focused colleagues, networking for the win. Yeah, for sure. I would say also there are a lot of places where we see this prosumer, and I'll talk about that again, commercial versus prosumer versus what have you. We'll talk about that in a second. In fact, we'll make that what we talk about next because of this. Professional versus prosumer versus hobbyist. And I think it's a false opposition. Because Lisa bring this up, I think it's a worthwhile thing to go ahead and go to next before I jump back onto some segments and some other stuff. There are a lot of people who are going to say, okay, professional embroidery, commercial embroidery, it looks like a certain way. It looks like what I used to work at, right? That's what that is. And it has to be that for it to be viable. So if you're not working in a shop where at least some corner of it looks like this, if you don't have multi-head equipment on site, if you're not sitting there at one of these machines that has, multiple heads, multi-needle, and if you don't have a field of these somewhere, and if you're not selling direct to people, and if you don't have logos on your wall like I do, then you're not really commercial. Like, that's what commercial business is. But the truth of the matter is, this is not only is this not all the shops, if you think about the number of embroiderers out there in the States or wherever you are, there's likely a large portion of them that aren't like this, that aren't set up this way, that have single heads, that work out of a third bedroom. And especially if nothing was learned during the pandemic, we should at least learn that these non-traditional methods are both viable and necessary for the continued propagation of our craft, especially when anything happens that shuts down factories. This is not the only way to be commercial. I mean, you don't have to have, and this is stuff that I had, right? That we were at. We don't have to have display cases, and we don't necessarily have to have showrooms in order to be real embroiderers. This is where I was working. This is a largely business to business, medium sized focus shop. That's what we were doing. And we are commercial custom decorators. Custom decorators meaning almost everything that we did was bespoke, was made specifically for one client. And I'll actually back out and show you some of the promotional product stuff too, because why not? It's fun. We did a bunch of promotional product stuff. So you'd see display cases like this at the place where I worked. It's called Black Duck. It's still out there now, not owned by the same people, and I'm not there. So you can't get my work there anymore, but they have lovely work now from the people who are working there. The thing is, we did all manner of things. We were also kind of a one-stop shop. So that's something else you'll find with a lot of these kind of commercial people who are working in this custom decoration space. The thing is, this is not more viable necessarily. This is not the only way things can be. That is not the only way that you should be. That doesn't make you yes or no, like an embroiderer or not, commercial or not. And frankly, like Lisa kind of said, there's tag teams. One of the other tag team things we did was, you see the kind of equipment we were running. Yes, we had a couple single head machines. Does that mean that it made sense for us to be doing things like I talked about previously, stocking names? Did I do a lot of them? Yes. Most of them that we kept on over time were ones done for people who were at businesses where we were also doing larger orders for them. Why? Because they're not the ideal fit for a multi-head shop like that. It's not the ideal fit to be doing small run, heavy personalization. That's not the ideal fit for a shop that has lots of multi-head equipment. The ideal fit for a shop that has lots of multi-head equipment is to be doing largely undifferentiated, same logo on most everything runs that were of a medium size, that were of larger count per piece. I mean, really, we did not want to be under a dozen, even in the times where minimums dropped and dropped and dropped. And I had been in shops previously where the minimum was much larger than that, where 48 was really the minimum before we're sniffing at orders. That is not how it turned out. Now that is not the case. You could not possibly maintain that kind of minimum unless you're maybe a larger contract shop where you do really have just a lot of large equipment, but then contract shop is set up differently. So here's the thing. First thing I'm going to say is this. Let's deal with the professional prosumer hobbyist thing for a minute. And just to kind of make a point about this, to show you how long I have been on this particular hustle and why I've been constantly called up about this stuff. This is just one of the latest articles I remembered that I had done, and it's years and years ago. I have been talking about this split for so long that I think I may have kind of dragged prosumer into this split, because the original way the word prosumer came about was in like camera gear. Back in the day when digital cameras were kind of propagating and people were starting to get really high-end cameras where photographers and people at home were also able to have the same kind of gear that made the same quality stuff, prosumer was a word that kind of came out of that space, where we finally had consumer level available hardware, machinery, equipment that could do what the commercial stuff did. And so people at home who are at the higher end of their craft as, amateurs, would have the kind of equipment other people did. I dragged that forward into embroidery because once I really understood and saw people using the home machines, tubular hooping, so not table, though obviously with a table option, tubular home machines with multiple needles, I started to see more and more people at home doing what I thought was commercial level work and selling into commercial markets. And I kind of termed that for myself prosumer. Now, I'm sure other people said the same thing at the same time because the word was floating around. But I've been saying that for so long that I brought this up. And this is an article from ASI, right? And cottage industry decorators, another thing people say. But I came out, and this is in 2019, me fighting, because the whole thing is called, let me bring you back to it, Rise of the Prosumer, Should Apparel Decorators Worry? This is 2019. And I've been saying it for a lot longer than this, that this is a division that people had worried about, to the point that I have a pull quote down here where I said this in 2019. The lines are being erased. That's probably a little panic inducing for a traditional decorator. Why you hear me constantly getting on this soapbox of saying, hey guys, the barrier to entry is no longer what it used to be, and just having a machine isn't enough to make you stand apart, is because it's not. It hasn't been for years. We are years past the point where if you just picked up a piece of embroidery, that you're going to know immediately whose machine it came from and what it was, unless there is something about the decoration specifically that is not possible on a home grade machine. And that's not likely for most things. The truth of the matter is you're just going to see high quality embroidery, or at the very least similar quality embroidery all over the place, not to mention lots of stuff that's in the commercial space, especially, we talk about traditional like department store embroidery, the stuff that is in any given store that you might go to get clothes off the rack. Some of that embroidery really isn't that high quality because it's mass produced and it's really made at the lowest possible price it can be. People making things out of their homes are equal quality. So here's the deal. If the question is quality, yes, do some people, when they are first starting, have a harder time achieving high quality than people who are experienced? Yes, but that's not a division between consumers or prosumers and hobbyists and professionals. There are very highly skilled hobbyists and prosumers. There are professionals who don't really love embroidery so much as they love making money. And in general, that means that there's really not a skill drop here. I think a lot of the problems were that back in the day, we had a lot of people in the craft area who were saying things that weren't really conducive to doing commercial work. And they were recommending what we would call hobbyist levels of engagement with their work. So much handwork, so much hand holding, so many processes to make something perfect that you only could do it out of labor of love because it was no longer profitable. And I think that's really where that dichotomy came from. And the thing is, people who love this work, who are amateurs in the classic sense, the word amateur has the root of loving the thing you're doing in it. Someone who loves what they do may spend more of their time that is commercially viable to get paid to do something and not price accordingly. And that's the real thing that was concerning people. Some people were concerned about them using materials that were not on par with ours. But I'm going to say over the years, the materials, the equipment have become so similar, and they're all made by the same companies. We know this, that as long as someone is not doing something that's just not good embroidery in the first place, the chances are, if you are skilled in making embroidery that passes the muster for a client, then the real definition that we're worried about is, what are you charging? Are you doing jobs that make sense for your market? Because that's the other thing, is you'll just find sometimes the people who do start from the hobbyist range and then move up into the professional or consumer or what I would say commercial range of embroidery, that sometimes if you love this work, you may find yourself putting in more work than you're actually getting paid for. And in the process, you can devalue the work by not charging what it's worth overall. And I think the way to combat that is not to be saying, all right, don't come to our shows, don't be here in our space. The right way to do that is say, come to the shows, come be with us. Let's talk about how that works and what it means to know your production numbers and what it means to know how much time you're spending, and make sure you're getting paid the right way for yourself. And then know what makes sense for somebody with a bunch of multi-head equipment versus what makes sense for somebody with a single head equipment, and how we can also do this other thing. We talked about tag team with Lisa, go back and forth where we can feed each other jobs and be in cooperation with each other, so that if you stay a high personalization small head or small head count shop, and I stay a medium level shop that would rather do the larger orders, we can maybe feed to each other what makes the most sense for the pay structure that we're working on and the equipment that we're using. So that's the thing. And actually, we have that also for B. B says this, and I fully agree. A lot of people start as a hobbyist and then slowly or quickly become professionals. Absolutely. That another thing I'll say is I've done a lot of craft stuff now. I've done a lot more like fiber arts and craft stuff now in my later years in this industry that I didn't do before, meaning that you can also do the other direction. You'll find me spending unpaid time making little stuff for people. Why is that? Because the love of the thing is still the love of the thing, and it doesn't make me less commercial. And my knowledge of the commercial space is still intact. So it's one of those things. It's not a sharp division. I think it's not necessarily the same division it used to be. But when you see it talked about, that's really what it is. Now, the other thing I'm going to say about this is that there are different segments and styles of shop to think about. So I am going to just briefly cover some of that and then talk about some segments and where they might fall in this. But obviously you're going to have let's imagine this, right? So let's say as you start into embroidery and you start selling them, the way you decide to set up your equipment, at first maybe you've got a single head multi-needle machine. That's what you're working on. The chances are, if you have that, or if you start to build what I call a fleet, which is multiple single head machines. So we have flexibility. What do they give you? We got flexibility. We can put different things on different machines at any given time. We can set some up with cap drivers and some with flats. So we can do different work on these different machines at any given time. What do we get out of that? We can really do well at small run and higher personalization jobs. So if things are going to be all individual, that means we can run multiple little individual things at the same time if we develop a fleet, or if we're on a single head, we just know that the best job for us is one that has it's highly personal to somebody. It is one to one piece at a time, but they also understand that in that small run that is highly personalized and idiosyncratic to the one person, that it's going to cost a little bit more to them per piece. But also, of course, it is because it's highly personalized. Each piece is different, or there's not many pieces to be had. It's not going to be a large bulk order. Single head or fleet style shops, that's going to make the most sense for that equipment setup. That's an equipment style, right? Multi-head, and it looks like I have misspelled something. I will fix that on the fly because that's how we do around here. Typo. All right, multi-head, not mullet head. That's a very different thing. Multi-head or custom shops. And here's the thing. When I say custom in this case, this is the kind of shop I'm talking about here, right? So this is mostly bespoke work, not personalization. We're going to talk about that too, because single head, though I said high personalization as in each piece is different, it can also be for single head shops. You're often finding people who are running these to do name drops or things where there's stock involved. Single head shops are more likely to do stock design or maybe they will do bespoke, but they will also do personalization because it's just really well set up. So personalization as in names, divisions, departments, but individually, that's a really great use for single head equipment, obviously, because each piece by its very nature has to be done at one time and doesn't then tie up a bunch of other heads on a multi-head machine. Then multi-head custom shops, really well set up for medium runs. You saw the shop that I showed you there. Now, at the time when I left Black Duck, it actually ran less heads than it used to, and the shop I was with previously ran more heads. It really depends on your type of work, because the previous shop I did also did more contract work, which we're going to talk about in just a second. Multi-head custom shops like the one that I worked in at Black Duck, which you guys know the most of my time was spent in. Medium-sized runs up to larger runs. I mean, we did massive runs as well, but the ideal job for us is probably a medium run that we can do customization, certainly in personalization, but we don't necessarily want every piece to be custom. That is not the best use of a multi-head machine kind of ever. It's going to slow it down. It is fantastic that we can do things like head assignment on some machines or flip machines on and off so we can add names to individual pieces on a run. Those are great ways to make use of our equipment, but it does always mean that there's a period of time where the needles are only running on one of the heads when you do that. And when we're talking about optimization of the run, that's not the optimal run. Optimal run is for all the heads to be running at the same time all the time. That's the optimal running kind of order for that shop. So the optimal job is going to be at least a medium-sized run. We're going to fill heads with that sucker, and it's going to be something that is fairly continuous and is not individually personalized. That's the best run for those shops. One stop, a lot of shops who are in this range, because they are not they're not going to be the contract shops that are focus on one type of work and don't deal directly with customers. They're usually contracted out. We'll talk about that again in a second. We are going to deal directly with customers. We're going to be a lot of B2B shops are going to set themselves up like this if they've got larger orders coming in. Like I said, all of these divisions can be broken. So we'll talk about that in a moment. People with the single head shops do tons of B2B, especially in locations where they have smaller runs or where the businesses they serve have low numbers of people they need to put in garments for real. It's just what the people need. But traditionally, medium-sized runs, yes, they'll do customization. And you'll see a lot of these shops in this middle range because of who they serve and how they serve often become one-stop shops. Hence the fact that I know how to do sublimation. Like that's because I also had to be the sublimation guy. And I worked always at a shop that had screen printing, frankly, probably as the first order of business for most of the shops I was in. Embroidery was added after the fact. I didn't work in an embroidery shop that had printing. I worked at printing shops that added embroidery. Certainly that came to be that they were in parity for much of the time. But the other thing we had for a long time were seasonal lulls where you would actually have a high embroidery season with a low screen print season and vice versa. That happened a lot because of what kind of garments we use. Outerwear in the winter, less t-shirts being quite as critical. Well, then your embroidery level goes up and your screen printing level goes down. That's how that works. But that's that multi-head shop. That's the kind of shop I worked in. So that's another way of setting up your equipment. You know that you're trying to get orders that fill heads. That would be your ideal order there. And that would be your ideal market too. You need to think of what markets are going to do that. And then on the other end, and this is a shop that I did not work at the most, I worked at a higher output medium shop that did some of this work, but contract work. There are people who have just mass numbers of heads. And what they do is large volume work, ideally, low levels of personalization and low interaction. They're not going to have salespeople who are hand holding a direct customer. They're going to take orders from promotional products people, other decorators who are not doing this kind of volume, who have already done the sales work and the interaction with the direct client, and they are just going to pump out the embroidery. They're just going to do the work. Largely going to get in customer supplied garments. Maybe they'll be supplying, but mostly they're going to get in customer supplied garments. They're going to run these things at the highest level of efficiency that they can. They don't want a ton of interaction. They want orders in. They want garments out. And contract is very different. And that's like, once again, if you're looking at this though, if we start thinking about equipment though, they have to know the same things absolutely that any other embroiderer has to know. They are running more equipment than any of us are running. And frankly, all of us are running very similar equipment. If you think that the process and the physics of embroidery are different on a single head machine versus a large, massive multi-head machine, on the micro scale, it is not. Yes, there are things that are different about how they run. At the same time, embroidery is embroidery. And ultimately, we may be serving the same clients and definitely be doing the same type of art, the same type of execution, the same type of garment decoration, and the same kind of type of garments we're decorating on. So, like I said, these divisions, these dichotomies we put up in front of ourselves to say who's who and what markets are they in, these are different ways we can operate. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're doing something different. Ultimately, it's all embroidery. Pardon me. It's all embroidery. Ultimately, we are doing the same things. We have to have a lot of the same knowledge. And in the end, I think that the similarities between us mean that when we're talking about execution and art and production, a lot of that is very similar. What we have to know about our craft is similar. But we definitely have a different order we're trying to get, whether we're single head or fleet, small shops versus medium or larger shops, multi-head shops, or large volume contract shops. Those are different kinds of orders we're trying to get. And that also means when we market ourselves, we're marketing to different people. If you're in a contract shop, who are you marketing to? Other decorators, promotional product sellers, and brokers. If you are in a multi-head custom shop, who are you marketing to? Both business to business and direct customers. You may also have a product line or something else, but mostly you're going to be looking toward other people who need promotional products and they're looking for a volume that fits your setup. You're a single head operator. You could be marketing to a lot of different people. It's very versatile, especially single head or fleet, but you're probably not looking for 1,000-piece orders because you're just going to swamp what you have and you're not getting the most out of your equipment. You should be getting that out to your contractor. And the funny thing is, instead of all being in competition, what we should say is you're a single head operator who stumbles onto a contract level job. Find yourself that contractor, throw a fee on top of that makes sense to you, and broker that out, being the person who has now become the seller, and the salesperson who understands embroidery well enough can help handle the art and then get that job off to somebody who can run those 1,000 pieces in a way that you in your third bedroom for night after night after night can't do, or at least will suffer doing. That's not a bad thing. That's that tag team ethos. That's building your dream team. So, like I said, it really is that kind of work. And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with being in any segment of this. There's nothing wrong with going back and forth. I've known people who went to multihead, found out that they were running their multi-head machines with like 3 of the heads empty all the time because they got themselves a 4 or a 6, and they were consistently running it empty with half of the machine off. And their actual job was single head. And then they ended up in a medium position where they're like, all right, I do want more equipment to get more done at any given part of the day, but most of my people need 1 to 2 pieces that are highly personalized and they're willing to pay for it. Then you want to get a fleet. Then you start saying, all right, I'm going to add multiple single heads so that I have flexibility, but I can produce more than I could before. And you can sell off your multi-head and go back to single. And that's fine. I will say, for all of you who want to go to multi-head, never get rid of your last single head. You will always need a machine for sampling and personalization and single small order jobs. It's just the way of it. It's just the cost of the business for me. Maybe the big producers do not have a lot of multi-heads around. I'd still keep them around for sampling so that you're not tying up a machine for that. My gosh, I would keep around singles for doing my sample work so that, or if there's a problem that I need to nut out by working it over and over and over again, I would want to have that on a single head and off of my big multi-head equipment. But there's nothing wrong with transitioning into the one that fits the market you're working for. The real problem, the thing that is wrong, if there is a wrong, is ignoring the fact that, number one, we are not the audience for our work. So doing just work that makes sense to us might not work if we're not aiming for people like us. It's why a lot of people, when they start their first marketing, market to a niche that they belong to. I'll talk about that in a second if you like. But that's why people do that, because it's much easier. Then you're kind of marketing to yourself and you know what people need. That's a problem. If you don't understand that you are not the audience, and then if you don't inquire and say, who is that audience and what do they need and what do they want? I mean, it's not always a need. It can be. We'll talk about different methods of value if you like. But the truth of the matter is, how am I going to provide something they find valuable, whether it's, actual value, something they really do need, or something that they just want? If you don't ask what they want and work toward that, there's no chance that you're going to hit it. You can't just say, I offer embroidery. All of us offer embroidery. All of those shops I just defined offer embroidery. Embroidery doesn't necessarily mean anything to the end customer. And especially if you think about an end customer that may not be knowledgeable of any of our topics. Here's the thing. I have had someone come in to me and say, can I get that kind of embroidery that's flat? And I swear they meant screen printing. I know. Think about that for a minute. They thought embroidered meant emblazoned or decorated. That's not frequent. People usually do know what it is. And now we live in an era where people do understand a lot more about what they want as far as decorations. They do research online. With the advent of everybody being chronically online and being able to research in their pocket, more people know what decorations are than they used to. But the amount that matters to people varies. And your client may not care what kind of decoration they're getting. They might not even know to look for it. They need to see something that they need, a result that they're trying to get. Like I talked about that brew pub example, if they want to look more professional, what we have to say is, I have the stuff that makes you look more professional, and I've selected some items to show you that are specific to the segment of being in a brew pub. These are the kinds of things you might want. I can make those, and I know how to decorate them in a way that holds up to the kind of stresses they'll have to be under and the kind of laundry that you're going to do with them, and that has a design on it that works for you. Or maybe, here's my work I did for another brew pub. This proves to you that I know how to do work for people like you. You have to think about your audience and your segment. So I think the dichotomy we keep putting in front of everybody is something where we're like, hey, like when people talk about going to the shows, Is this for professionals or prosumers or hobbyists? To be honest with you, I will say this. You go to the Impressions Expo show, it's huge. You can get onto the floor for free by talking to vendors and stuff. And even if you can't, it's cheap just to get on the floor. If you want to go see the spectacle of the largest equipment you can imagine, it's going to be there, and not the largest, the stuff that they're willing to cart onto the floor. But if you're someone who's only ever seen a single head machine and you want to see a bunch of 12s running, loaded for bore, yeah, go ahead. You will see machines running quickly with a lot of stitches on them doing crazy stuff. You will see people making big moves with large equipment. That is true. But if you think there aren't people there to serve you with your single head desires, they are absolutely there for you too. Those people are there. Smaller regional shows like the DAX shows, things like that, they will have more of a hobbyist bent, but you'll see they're really kind of in the prosumer space these days. Certainly going to be hobbyists there. You're going to find more gift style, and I'll talk about that again in a second. That's the next thing I'm going to go to before we kind of close out. They'll have more gift style options, things that are maybe decorated and given to single people, items that in and of themselves are valuable. It's not the decoration that makes them primarily valuable, because nobody's really super valuing a polo shirt because it's a polo shirt. They want to get the message on the polo shirt and give it to you. That's, yes, we want to provide valuable shirts that people like to wear. But when they come to you and say, I need Mark's Plumbing, I need, Bubba's Route 66 bar on these polo shirts, it's because a server needs a shirt that looks nice, that it's going to wash nice, that has their logo on it. The logo's the meaning. The thing that they're looking for is the personalization, is that professional look. Whereas if they come to you and they want a decorated teddy bear, the teddy bear is important. The decoration shows that it's for a certain person and adds an extra level of thoughtfulness to it. And that's a gift style thing. And you're going to find more of that kind of stuff, cubbies and teddy bears. And also, you're going to find people selling things on the floor instead of just repping them. You go to Impressions Expo, they're not engaged necessarily in selling you cones of thread right there. There's not a store in the Madeira booth to sell you thread. They're there to show you what new threads are there so that when you call your rep, you're going to order your thread from them. It is more of a larger commercial show. You go to the DAX shows, there's a high likelihood you're going to run into like Katie Woobin with her booth open that has all the threads in it, and she's going to sell you thread. That's what's going to happen. You're going to be able to go buy cubbies, buy thread, buy rolls of transfer material. You're going to be able to buy that stuff at those mid-level shows. So is there a difference? Yes. But as a hobbyist, would I go to the Impressions Expo show? Yes, I would. Go see the latest machines, go see the big stuff, ask them about the single heads, and they probably have those on the floor too and are willing to talk about what they cost and what they can do. Are they going to lean toward people who are looking to finance a big machine today? Probably. Probably. You're going to find that in some of the booths. Not all of them, but probably. And you're going to see lots of imports and lots of printing, lots of screen print, lots of direct to film, lots of direct to garment, other equipment than embroidery is going to be there and out there in the world. You go to the DAX shows, much, much smaller shows, but they're going to be more focused in the prosumer world. Whereas if you go to shows that are very specific, they kind of talk to hobbyists to prosumer level work, you're going to find that. You're going to find more home style machines, certainly, and you're going to find more people who are vending directly, and you're going to find more project level education where they run you through a project. And there are hobbyist shows. I mean, Applique Getaway also ventures into what I would call lots of prosumer stuff, but there's also hobbyist stuff as well. The thing is, when we're talking about skilling up for digitizing, skilling up for embroidery itself, many of those things will be similar. But if you go to the dyed-in-the-wool commercial shows like Impressions Expo, certainly you're going to see more people talking about larger production methods. If you go to a mid-range show, you're going to find people talking about both commercial production methods and more prosumer stuff. You go to a show that is largely hobbyist and serviced by more hobby brands, then we're going to see more people talking about how to do things in the home, single piece work, and projects. Doesn't mean that any of these wouldn't teach you something. Absolutely not. They will teach you something. And like I said, if you're working in the business, let's say you're trying to sell your work, your classes, your stock designs into the embroidery world, any of those segments might be valuable to you, and you might want to actually get a hold of all of them. But like I said, these are different ways people work and different ways people set up their shops. And like I said, there's a comment here from Doug, and I feel this too. I mean, I understand this. I want to grow my business to be able to buy a multi-head. Absolutely. Nothing wrong with it. And like I said, if you grow it toward that point and you start looking for those clients who need the multi-head, you'll get there. I would say also work with multi-head embroidery in your area if you can. It's a good idea to have one on tap to start taking that kind of work. But with your knowledge of embroidery, you're also a great salesman for that work as you work through it. What I would say is, don't think of yourself as not there yet. Think of yourself as looking toward that segment you want to serve. You're there. You're just looking to move into that segment and be able to service a different group of people who have those needs. And that's all right. I think that's the thing. Back in the day when I first started, lots of people who started out hobbyist or single head almost looked at themselves and said, I can't charge that. I'm not a pro. I didn't go buy a big machine yet. The big machine does not make you the pro. And I've showed you guys a million times how we have large retail establishments who are doing custom on-site decoration with home level single head and even single needle machines. We're having like bespoke decorations being done in like big fashion houses with home style equipment because it's easier to travel with. And they're doing these like on-site activations for massive brands. Burberry is one that was off the top of my head, but there's one, I remember Levi's did a big thing like that too. Set up these booths where they had stock designs selected and people put stock designs and text on their own jackets and spent inordinate amounts of money. Did that not look like a commercial venture? Yeah, it was just a very different kind of commercial venture than the things I showed you. When people talk about commercial embroidery, it looks like what I was doing, but that doesn't mean that's the only way. And frankly, when I look at what I was doing, I don't want to be, dismissive of my own work, but that's not the most exciting embroidery that's out there in the world. That's not the only way to make money. And if we think about what I made per piece on these, you better believe that when somebody with a brand that had massive backing, if you talk about our per stitch price for what they were making embroidering, Burberry scarves with a couple of letters versus what I was doing embroidering jacket backs on these things, I will bet you dollars to donuts that I was making less money per stitch doing this by far than the people at Burberry who were, monogramming a scarf. I'm sure of it. The thing is, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. All of these markets are necessary and vital and part of what we do. But that's the thing is we got to not tell ourselves that they aren't. And we have to look at what we can accomplish and what markets not only do we want to serve, but should we serve for to make the money we want to make and to do the kind of work we want to do. And we have to show the kind of work we want to do and address it to the kind of people who want that work in order for this commercial venture to get off get off the ground, to get into the space we want it to be. And Identity Threads has a comment too here, and I love this. My goal is 4 to 6 singles, fleet style. See, that's a lot of more what we see today, and I love it. I kind of love fleet style work. My first Tajima TMBR is paid off this month. Let's stop and congratulations, golf clap. Why not? I think that is a very worthwhile thing. Pay off that machine and move on. That's great. Lovely to hear that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that method. You don't have to get into multi-head equipment. In fact, I'll tell you what often happens is people have single head equipment. They start doing the kind of jobs that are multi-head. And if it's not something that they're willing to, or because of their execution, the kind of embroidery they do, or the quality that they want to maintain, they don't want to contract that out or find that that's not worthwhile for them. Or maybe their clients really want to deal direct and they're not okay with getting third-party work done. Whatever that is that makes them do that, they start taking more jobs that feel the crunch, that make them sit in front of that single machine, cranking it all day long, working just toward that larger order. And they start to feel that chafing against that line where you're like, I really need to have that equipment to make that production happen. That's where people get into multi-head or buying multiple machines. And it really probably should go like that for most folks. It's not that you can't jump right in. Lots of people do. But then what I'm going to say is if you jump right in, number one, I hope that you already know embroidery to some degree. It's better than just buying tons of equipment and hoping for the best. It happens to folks, and a lot of people land fine if they're the kind of people who learn fast and work hard. But it does define for you what you need to do to keep it up. And that means I've got to pay for that machine. I need to fill those heads as much as I can, or I need to charge more like a single head shop till I get there. So I'm just making more per garment if I'm not going to keep those heads full. I've got to work that out. And my clientele either has to, fill the heads for that machine, or they have to pay enough that it's okay that I'm not filling those heads and I'm not making that money all the time or dropping that number of stitches per hour. We just have to understand what that is. And that thing is, That's also part of customer needs and customer will, right? What do they want? What do they need? And we have to think about who those customers are that are going to make that happen for us. So the other thing I'm going to talk about very briefly here, let's talk a little bit about kinds of embroidery too. I already talked about custom decoration. This is just another thing where we're talking about these larger segments. Custom decoration is like what I was doing and what a lot of people consider the standard commercial embroidery. Business to business is a lot of it, and B2C. But here's what I'm going to say: direct customer. And we want to call business to business, I'm going to say dealing with schools, dealing with teams, dealing with larger groups to me is very similar to business. There may be a lot of personalization with some of that, but in the largest part, just because something's not a traditional business doesn't mean it isn't like a B2B client. B2B client is going to be less likely for everything to be personalized, is going to have a logo that needs to go on a lot of things. That's a kind of work that we're very comfortable with in the commercial space. We do a lot of B2C also. And you also may find us running things like a product line. I know we ran several product lines of our own design and sold those into traditional retail sometimes, or ran our own traditional retail. But the thing is, this is pretty common. And in fact, we also stray into uniforming, though it's not what I would call a traditional uniform shop. And here's kind of the difference for that. Done a ton of uniform stuff. In fact, one of the largest e-commerce things I ever did was to run an entire uniforming site that served a large hospital group that's all through the Southwest, right? And that hospital group had us do all of their uniform work, but I wouldn't call it traditional uniforming because even though we did offer those uniforms and service them with those, we did not do any kind of uniform services like repair of the uniforms or cleaning or any of the rest of that. That is a different world doing garment services. And so I don't call us a uniform shop so much as a shop that did a lot of uniforming work. So custom decorators, the other thing is that middle ground where you're doing a little bit of everything, you may find yourself involved in everything from gift and personalization work out to uniforming, whereas there are people who are ideally doing that as a niche, right? But folks like me who are doing this kind of work, the chances are we are doing that on multi-head equipment and we're having a mid-size setup. The thing I'm going to say is, though, if I were running in a rural area and there just weren't a lot of other people around me and I'm running single head equipment, you think I'm not going to do this for the local businesses? Of course I am. They may decide that they'd rather work with a local business than ship stuff off. And if they do, then the chances are, if I am the only game in town or one of three, the chances of me doing this kind of work on 1 to 2 singles and maybe even home style singles, not rare at all. Not rare at all. We have to understand that our individual markets and position are also part of this thing. I can tell you who to go for clients, but it's also your region and what it's possible for you to go for, or who you're going to go to as far as your primary market. Certainly, we don't have to worry about region all the time in the world of e-commerce. We can sell to anybody, but it does mean kind of figuring out and isolating all the shipping costs, everything else that relates to that, and making sure that makes sense for us. The other kinds of embroidery I discussed earlier that are worth kind of mentioning too, gift embroidery. The classic I always come up with, I always say like the embroidered teddy bear, because honestly, I did a lot of digitizing for gift embroiderers, believe it or not. And what I did were custom lines of designs that a teddy bear manufacturer used. A predecessor of mine did that at my shop, and he had done that work for them, and we kept on doing that work. So I did that work. But what I always kind of think about, I mean, you can go to the Build-A-Bear workshop and get it. So larger companies also do it, but it could be anybody who does this stuff. But that's what I'm saying, right? It's stock designs and personalization. You're not going to get your custom logo on most of this stuff. They're going to offer you a selection of fonts, and you are going to do that work. That's kind of the gift work. Why do I call it gift work? Because the object itself is of value. You're trying to get William a teddy bear. You are trying to get Mary an umbrella. You are trying to get something for someone. Yes, the decoration is important, but they may not have a logo. They're not someone who has corporate guidelines for their stuff. They're not asking for a Pantone color necessarily. You might get all of that foolishness, but it's not necessarily the case. And with people who have like gift sites, these are gift websites that hawk everything. But this does make me think of the kind of things you might see in a showroom of a local gift style shop. During the right season, you're going to find them with a bevy of stockings and blankets. Any given time, they're going to have tote bags and all manner of things that you can embroider in dolls and purses. And these are things that are common, or bags and backpacks and golf towels. All of these things are gift items. They're meant for someone to consume and use. They are not necessarily promotional. They are personalized. And this means that you're more likely to have a small set of stock designs that you offer. In this case, if we're looking at this little rolling luggage, I believe it has a little airplane on it, or it's got a train and the name Jeremy. You can select from a certain number of designs. You can select from a certain number of fonts, and they will give you a number of characters you can fit in the area, and that's the end of it. This is another kind of stuff you can set yourself up to do. And there are a lot of single head folks who do something like this, where the import is partially on the object. Whereas when you're talking about a just dyed in the wool custom shop like we were doing, a lot of the objects were commodities. Yes, they might say, I want a super nice Ping or a Nike polo shirt, or I want this particular hat. But the value was in the promotional value of the logo on the garment, not on the object itself necessarily. Is there a value attached to it? Yes. But anything that's going to cover our workers or anything that's going to be there to carry our logo is the actual most important thing. And then you do a lot more work in the digitizing, in getting that design handled, in making sure that their corporate look is maintained. Whereas gift embroidery, a lot more stock designs, a lot more personalization with stock fonts, and you're going to be marketing a very different way. In this case, it's about your ease of use. It's about the objects you can get for them that you can show, and that kind of use case, about the gift market, about who is it for and how are they going to feel, versus what can I provide you? What values does it have? Does it work for your company? And showing your professionalism, showing your logo, whatever it is. So gift embroidery for me is that kind of embroidery. I wouldn't say people always call them gift shops. You also find stuff like this sometimes at other kinds of places. The thing is, if you go into the mall to a lids shop that has embroidery on hats that already have logos, it's a similar thing where, yeah, for them, the logo is important. It's the logo of this team that's important, but they've got a set of stock personalizations they'll do on the side of the hat, and that just adds to it, and it's an additional service. But I still consider that more of that gift embroidery style, which you're not going to see them doing necessarily as a load of custom digitizing orders. And if they do, they should probably be kicking that out to a custom person, right? That's really the better match. And it usually means a place that does gift embroidery is more likely to be single head or fleet style. Single head or fleet style makes a lot more sense because, the backpack for Judy and the backpack for Jimmy are not going to be the same. So having a large multi-head machine doesn't make a lot of sense. We're not going to be embroidering the same thing on all of them unless we have something where, by some reason, maybe we are like a team sports shop where a lot of our stuff gets the same logo but just gets a name under it. Then we start to see something different. But that's not really gift embroidery anymore. That's more uniforming or more custom decoration again. Uniforming, when I say that, there are uniform shops that also just avail themselves of the fact that they're handling garments to do embroidery too. Many uniform shops put names on things. They may have, especially if they're using patches, they may order all of their logo stuff pre-done on patches, but because of the way that turnaround is and how quickly they need to service people, the chances are they might have smaller equipment in-house to do individual name patches or name drops on garments. There are tons of shops that will have some small embroidery production where their primary focus is to sell a uniform you need. You need scrubs. You're going to be on the floor as a nurse. You need to come to a place that has the highest range of scrubs so you can get scrubs that are the right color for your company that's been approved. But you're allowed to have your name on it and you're allowed to have it in this particular style. Someone needs to embroider that. Why you would do that as a big custom order rather than going to the scrub shop and the scrub shop has a name. It can depend on the shop. It can depend on the corporate branding. It can depend on relationships between decorators and the people who run your hospital. Trust me, I know. At the same time, it's pretty similar. It's pretty simple to go to a uniform shop and have them do that. So there could be specialty uniforms as the garment. That's where the value's at. And so the resale is probably the highest thing they're making money on is the garment, which is pretty normal anyway to some embroiderers. But people will also come in to buy the garments undecorated. That's where the thing is. The uniform is a little different in that case, possibly. The thing is, you might also have a traditional uniforming shop where they also do things like come pick them up for laundry, come drop off new uniforms and service them, do repairs, what have you. So you could get cleaning and pressing and all the rest of that could be part of that too. So uniform shops that do garment services like that might also do personalization, name drops, name patches, or even logo stuff. Though I think some of that you will see, some of it is done by ordering a bunch of patches that are heat pressed on, and then the names are done in house. Also, you can find people who are doing all of that. They can be doing stuff that's really comparable to what I did at the kind of custom B2B shops. They might also be hiring out digitizers and doing the full logo drops themselves too. Very common enough to see that just as well as anything else. But it could be as little as doing name drops or name patches only, and everything else is handled elsewhere. So they're not doing a ton of creative or design work. They might just be doing personalization, while also, once again, having the primary focus of the shop being providing uniforms. And then, kind of outside of that, and this is even another kind of small segment, it's not in every region, not every part of the US or part of the world sees monograms as a viable option. But depending on where you're at, and boy, especially if you're in the southern US, you're going to find monogramming as something that is absolutely viable as a end unto itself. And that can be very similar to gift shops where they are offering gift items, but it can also be just a place that does monogramming. You bring in your garments, your gear, and they drop monograms on it. And or they provide something with monograms on it. And their primary work is to have the styles of monograms people like and to know how to handle the business of what letters go where and to put them where they need to be on a garment. That can be a shop in and of itself. So, like I said, shops can be all sorts of different things. Embroidery is this multi-headed thing, right? And the thing is, monogramming, though, I would say you're more often, once again, going to be single head and fleet, because they're not going to be necessarily somebody who comes in with 12 of the same dress shirt that they want the cuffs done on. Might they? Could. But the most likelihood is they're going to bring in a couple of bespoke items and they're going to get the monogram. Now, you might also find that these kind of shops might also have partnerships with larger companies that offer the monogramming, maybe clothing companies, things like that, and they may do anything up to and including contract work. You could set yourself up as a contract monogrammer if you want to. There's ways to handle this, but it does mean you are more likely to do single head or fleet or be flicking things on and off. I will say it is less cumbersome to tie up heads when you're doing something that usually is such a short run. I mean, those are extremely short runs to do a set of monograms on a cuff. But there can be also massive monogram pieces, and you will find people doing monograms on pillowcases and quilts and sheet sets that are huge. They're enormous. In fact, when we were making the Renaissance set, the Renaissance stock design set, if you haven't seen Renaissance Fair from Embrilliance, Brian made the original versions. I came in and worked on them again when we were making the new revisions. They are made to scale really large because the original concept was that people were doing these things that Brian likes to call megagrams, and that may be his term entirely. These huge monograms where people are doing a foot on a side monograms that they were running on these big like bed sheet sets and linens. And he wanted to make something that would go big, right? Where you could actually get that to fluctuate through a large range of sizes to do a set of linens for the house. There are people doing all manner of work, and the thing is, they may be getting paid differently for it because they also might be doing them for different segments. Because the thing is, just because you're doing monogramming doesn't mean you're at a monogram shop. Who else does a lot of monograms? Bridal shops, right? And you may find that's where people are at. I mean, lots of folks that I've talked to and worked with do that, where you might find that it's a large market, even here where monograms aren't as quite as prevalent as maybe down south. Here in the Great American Southwest, where I'm from, we still did stuff like this. Now, this is not mine. This is Carolyn's work, or not Carolyn's work. God's, I've lost everybody's work together, but I've got multiple people who've done this work before. God's, my brain is blowing out. But a good friend of mine who I worked with earlier, she did this work, and her name just escaped me entirely. She did this wonderful bridal piece, and I went out to see her while we were doing this stuff. But suffice it to say, lovely bridal work, and she knows very well how to do the things you need to do for that, which is to make it run beautifully on light materials. But it is still a monogram piece, and she has to know things about interlacing monograms, what kind of scripts are popular, and how to market that. But I'm definitely going to tell you once again, if you know how to do this very well, how to embroider beautifully on tulle and to make that turn out nicely, you are going to be able to market at a higher per stitch value than someone like me who was doing logo work on polo shirts. It's just not the same. And if you market to the right segment, and yeah, by the way, B says this, and I fully agree. Um, how amazing is that monogram? It's fantastic, right? It's fantastic. Her work is beautiful. And in fact, if I don't know if I've got other work of hers, and I'm going to pull out to the pieces here. She's got a couple other pieces here. This is a piece I did on monogramming, and I've got Kathy Sunderman's here, and why? Oh my gosh, that I can't remember my friend's name, who was the first person I went and visited on these tours. I feel so terrible that it just left me right now. She did such amazing work on tulle, and she made me want to work on light materials that I never really had before. And some of these are actually my pieces in mine and Kathy, who's called Stitch Fork online. She used one of my Viking Age style pieces to make this monogram, and all she does is show monogramming work online, and her stuff is customizing monograms and adding things to them. You can see some of the beautiful work she put in, right? So Stitch Fork, if you see her on like Instagram, did these. That's a fully viable version of embroidery and can include custom work. I mean, she was putting together these custom pieces where she's interlacing stock designs and stock lettering to make these incredible kind of compositions that she did. And of course, there's little pieces of mine that you've seen in here too before, where I've done some of this monogramming work. But all of this is viable. And I would say, once again, do work like this on someone's fine linens. Do work like we see here on a piece of lovely bridal tulle. And it's hard to argue that that's not going to pull a high value because of what it is and what's possible. Should she have multi-head equipment? No. Multi-head equipment won't make her more viable, more commercial, more valuable than she is right now. And in fact, she's making more money per piece by far doing this kind of work. Her overhead is very different and can do that. So yeah, like I said, it's very much worthwhile to understand that uh, stitch counts aren't the end all of charging or value. More stitches, more decoration does not make something more valuable. What makes something more valuable is the estimation in the eyes of the person purchasing it. This can come from a lot of places, and it's something that I talk about a lot. And I'm just going to very briefly hit this before we get done here, right? We're talking about value. There's different kinds of potential product values. I said I was going to talk a little about potential products. I accidentally made that a scroller, it looks like. We'll fix that too. Sorry for making that a ticker. But potential product value is a very different thing, right? A potential product value can be either actual value or perceived value. What do I mean by this? Actual value is stuff where you kind of can't dispute it. If I am the only person in your region who understands how to make fire resistant decorations and who knows what fire resistant garments are and can access them, and you happen to be in the work of maybe being a lineman, or you are a fire person, you are someone who works in first responding, if you are a race driver, you need someone who can give you that thread. If I provide that thread, I can charge more than the guy next door who only works with polyester and doesn't know this stuff, and I'm going to be valuable to you at the very outset. Or let's say you need work jackets. I have work jackets. I can get you those Carhartts tomorrow. Whether or not I'm the best embroiderer on earth might not be what's valuable to you. It's actual value. I'm going to keep your guys warm on the job site, and I can do it locally, and I've got the cost set up to do it. Yes, it's going to make a difference if I can decorate well, but how artistic I am may not be that useful to you, especially if what you want to put on there is, Jimbo's Plumbing, and you're not throwing like a big crane on the back like you might see from Mark's crane that I have up here, where I did do some pretty artistic work from a photo. But hey, if that is your job, if that is what you want, then it starts to matter. That's where we get into perceived value. But actual value, I'm literally giving you something better. Or you want high-end gear. Everybody else is giving you Gildan. I'm over here giving you brand name, higher end stuff and doing really fine work on it. And you're selling into, let's say, a higher end golf store where people there do not buy Gildan off the rack. That's actual value too, to some degree, because I can say it costs more to me. I have more work into it. It's actual value to you. It's easy to justify. Perceived value is the other way around. You look at that bridal piece and there's less stitches in it. It didn't take as long necessarily. Now, in that case, we're also putting wash away stabilizers under it. We're also very carefully laundering and getting that nice and prepped, and it's being delivered and packaged nicely. There may be more work in it than the average polo, but if we're talking about stitch count, time on the machine, how hard it was to digitize, wasn't that hard to digitize in comparison to any other set of letters in any other logo. Uh, Certainly they're scrolly and pretty, but it's not more. Let's say this: those 3 letters are not more time spent on the equipment on digitizing than the 7 letters or 8 letters in the VW patch right here. They took me as much time as those 3 letters in the monogram, even if they were made custom bespoke without a stock font. And those might be run on a stock font. A stock font name drop is a heck of a lot faster than any of the stuff I had to do custom for clients. Does it mean that I got paid what she got paid for that veil? Absolutely not, because the value to a bride on her wedding day, the value to someone who is paying for that veil for the one special day of their life where they're going to want it, and they want the memories to be just so and the pictures to be just so, that value is a lot higher that they perceive. And because they can do it on a material that many of us are going to look at and go, hey, I could try it, but I'm not sure. I don't know what I'm doing. That's not a polo shirt. That's not a jacket. That's not a hat. Now, a lot of us do know more than that, but not everybody. So that might not be something your average embroidery shop is going to kick out that easily. Now there's a perceived value that's higher. There's actual value in the work that she knows how to do. And there's perceived value in the fact that it is related to a very important day in someone's life that only comes once. The perceived value is how much it's worth to you in context. All of us have bought a souvenir thing that we know from the bottom of our hearts, especially if you're in the garment decoration industry. If you have ever bought an embroidered hat or a t-shirt from an event, you know that you paid for a massive profit margin, but you might have bought it anyway. Why? Because it was at the time, at the place, related to the memory. And that was important. So the perceived value went up. I've got some hats that I bought when I was a student in Iceland right after I had started doing this kind of work. And let me tell you how ugly those hats are. My little Iceland hats have some of the nastiest embroidery. They are low profile, almost painter style hats. They're like bike hats. I still wear those suckers decades down the road. Why? Because I bought them in Reykjavik when I stepped off the plane. And I wanted the little hat that said Iceland on it. I was over there going to learn some Íslensku. And so you know very well I wanted that hat. Did I pay too much for the hat? I don't know. Argue with me about it. Maybe I did. But the truth of the matter is the perceived value is about that. So, and once again, when we're talking about actual versus perceived value, do you think that someone on a home style machine, prosumer equipment, cannot produce something that is valuable to someone in their perception? If you think that's true, you're wrong. Also, if you think that someone in a commercial environment, like where I came from, could not produce something very artistic and that looked like something bespoke off of a fashion line, also very incorrect. All that fashion stuff is produced in dank little warehouses like that. I mean, a very large amount of the boutique things you see in the world are produced by people who may or may not look like me and may or may not be working in warehouses that used to be converted auto body shops. You don't know. So the thing is, any of these values are somewhat arbitrary. It's what we can produce for the customer, and it is also presenting ourselves to the customer as a potential source for that work. But we have to understand our audience and move in that way to make that stuff happen, right? So it is fantastic to say, that there's a difference. Yes, there are differences. The differences are mostly about how we move in the world and the business that we want to do, not necessarily in some base quality that makes us ultimately different. So yes, as was the topic here, we did talk about all these things, right? When we're making money with our machine embroidery or even in machine embroidery, and we talked a little bit about that, maybe not quite as much. I've talked about selling stock designs, and maybe I'll do that again shortly. I think it's a worthwhile thing to discuss. We talked about these different segments. Value can differ from segment to segment. Like I said, bridal has super high value on low stitch count items. Whereas that is not necessarily the case in a uniform shop where you're dropping names. You might have the exact same amount of machine time on the exact same machine. That does not mean that they should be charged the same way, or that people outside of that world that know all these arcane things we do at embroidery will value them the same way. Obviously not. Context matters a lot. Styles of business. Is single head or fleet better than multi-head? No, it's just adapted for a certain kind of work more. You have a single head or fleet type work, high personalization, short run is going to be more adapted to the equipment you have. It's going to be more fit, as in survival of the fittest. It is the best adaptation, the best to serve your adaptation, than a large order that has all the same stuff. That's going to be better on a multi-head setup, where we're going to run multi-head equipment, so it all has the same stuff, that it's not going to vary from piece to piece, and it should be medium to large runs. If you're a contract embroiderer with a football field full of 25 head embroidery machines, individual name drop pieces really aren't your jam. That's not the right job for you. Does it mean it's better or worse? No, it's better suited to a type of work, which also means that you, as the owner of your football field full of machines, should not be chasing orders from the bridal people who want to make a single veil that's just so. That's not the order for you that's going to be the most adaptive. Could you do it? 100%. If you know your stuff, any of the styles of order, any of these potential orders are there for you if you want to take them. I'd rather partner with people who know what they're doing in each particular category and get them that work, and then develop professional relationships where we don't take the work that makes us the least amount of money and causes the most amount of headache. However, of course, there's nothing ultimately all that different between those things. And certainly when we're talking about this, and like I said, I called this in parentheses, I give you little scares here, parentheses to separate that. I said somewhat false opposition. There is some difference between being a full-time professional commercial embroiderer, a prosumer level embroiderer who does maybe sell some and has equipment of that level, and someone who is a full-time, or not full-time, but who is fully in the hobbyist space that may or may not sell, or sells something on an occasion, but is not meant to do this as a commercial venture, or doesn't really have any interest in that. There are differences in how we might move in the world and what we might choose to do with our machines. But ultimately, especially once we get to a certain level of prosumer equipment, is it very different between, let's say, a professional single head, a prosumer single head, that a hobbyist might also have because they want larger embroidery area and multi-needles? The work you're going to put out is largely similar. Speed might be an issue, and that causes efficiencies to be different. But you could be a very highly skilled prosumer embroiderer and be putting out fine work that looks better than anything that's coming out of a department store, or most of the things that are coming out of a lot of commercial shops. It's not a skill definition. It's a definition of what you want to do with your time in your machine. It's a definition of the way you want to operate, and potentially the audience you're trying to serve, if you're someone who's doing this commercially, who's doing this to sell. When you see a lot of the stuff that's out there at these commercial embroidery trade shows, it's going to be aimed at people who are like me, where I worked in a place that was medium size with multi-head equipment, who was buying equipment fairly regularly, and who was trying to run medium-sized jobs, lots of B2B, definitely some B2C in there, but who was trying to run those medium-sized orders and keep those needles moving, because it was the primary goal is to make that money with the equipment, even if we are also very interested in our quality and creativity. But that's what you'll see at a show that is larger and that is meant for those folks. Can you go there as a hobbyist and have a heck of a time? Absolutely. I've been there with hobbyists who just get their mouths dropped open by all the incredible equipment that's there. And many of them decide, like, man, I'm going to get commercial just so I can play with it. But hey, I've also known people in this world who love embroidery, have the money from other ventures in their lives, doctors, lawyers, and the like, who just for whatever reason love to embroider when they're at home, and they buy full tilt commercial equipment to have their fun on because they can. There is no problem with that. The thing I'm going to tell you is, if you think that that's going to also make you good, or validate you, it will not. There are lots of people out there with beautiful full tilt embroidery equipment who are calling me and showing me their horrific results so I can help them figure out what's going wrong. The equipment's not going to change you. The style of business won't necessarily verify you or make you more money necessarily per garment. It might not make your garment more valuable, but it is all about servicing the segment we're looking for. So if we're looking toward people who might have larger, let's say I want to be in the plumbing and construction segment, that's where I want to serve. The likelihood is I might need multi-head equipment if I'm going to serve larger companies, and they're almost always going to get a ton of garments that are going to have logos on them. And then I may also want to have some single head equipment for doing personalization, or know that I'm going to price correctly because I'm going to lose some time turning heads on and off while I drop names. But I know that now, because what do I know? I know the pain points of the people I'm working for. They need durable garments. They need to meet their budgets, and they want garments that are decorated accurately, that have the right logos on them where they belong, in thread that will hold up to the torment of the work that they do and the laundry they're going to put them through. So I know what materials I need to learn about. I know what garments I need to look for. I know the kind of equipment that I'm supposed to be using for the size of orders that they tend to do with the throughput they're working for, by knowing the size of the businesses and how often they order, and getting a handle on that, investigating that. And I will know a little bit more about the styles I'm going to serve. But that's also in doing that kind of work of understanding your segments, your defined audiences, and going down to the level, perhaps, like I said, of profiles, and saying, who is that customer who's buying? What are their pain points? What do they need? And how can I serve them best? All right, folks. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and tie this up. We're going to finish this up for today. Certainly going to talk more digitizing and technical stuff as we go, with me going into the professional shows, going to Impressions Expo soon. So if you are still interested in that, and you could be in Long Beach, California in a couple weeks, longbeach.impressionsexpo.com is where to go to find out about me teaching both Technique Toolkit with Justin Armenta and Joe. And we're going to be out there teaching, Joe Kramer, teaching that stuff. And also Bonnie Nielsen's going to be there hanging out, talking about small thread, working on that. That's a new addition that we had. But started out doing that. We're going to do that. And then I'll be teaching about dealing with your kind of embroidery disasters, embroidery RX kind of stuff, diagnosing. With that show coming up that is very much commercial, people ask me what that means. I just felt like I needed to go ahead and get that out there again. But I also wanted to encourage you to say, hey, there's a lot of places that embroidery fits. If you're in embroidery, there is someone to purchase it. It's been around for thousands of years, largely as a luxury, but now it is available for everybody. Somebody's out there that needs what you need or what you do. Get out there and show the kind of work you want to do to the kind of people who need it and who want it, and find the fit as best you can. Market to that fit customer, that fit order for yourself. You'll be happier in the long run. Doesn't mean you won't take other stuff. Everybody always says to me, but I want to get all the orders. I want to get everybody. You will. You will. You're still there. Showing some other kind of work won't turn that off, but it's more likely to hit with the people who are looking for that work. So think about your audiences and think about what serves your setup and what you want to be doing with your time. I mean, ultimately, that's the real thing. So last couple of comments. We've got B says, love this. Lots of cookbooks doesn't make you a chef. Absolutely not. No, it's the practice of the thing makes you good. But also, here's the thing too. Not having a cookbook, but knowing how to make some food, that you might still be a chef too. If somebody wants to buy that food, right? You might still be able to sell that food. You got to be good and actually just have to serve people who want it. DJ Kev says, so many categories of business needs. Embroidery is here to stay. Absolutely. I've dabbled in the automotive area, headrest and car mat. That's another great one. You learn how to do upholstery work and get in with the right people. And sometimes you will do some crazy stuff. I did reproduction pieces for a limousine and did the digitizing for that and got paid very well for the digitizing. And the person who did the, it was like a 30s limousine, who did the embroidery for that, that interior also got paid very nicely, but you had to be very precise. Boy, he gave me like measured drawings, and it was like an old school architect's draft. It was wild. But the thing is, some of those people who are doing custom car stuff are just willing to drop, because what do? They spend a lot of money on this car and it's important to them. It's what they want. It's what's important to them. That's how we get it. And also love to see everybody chatting, but great to see everybody. Glad you guys were here. I wish I could come to Australia, B. I would love to someday. Not in the cards right now, but if I get to, you'll be the first to know. All right, folks, get out there, do some embroidery for you, but think about who you're doing embroidery for and who might want that embroidery that makes it pay off so that time you're spending is good for you and for them. There is a market out there for you to serve, people who would love to have your work and who would trade for you what they should and give you the value back that you're putting into it. Think about who they are. Take some care to understand that. And you might just find that you get paid the way you need to be. And honestly, you'll be valued a little higher too. But sometimes in the perception, folks, know the context, get out there and be curious. Right. Can't wait to see you guys again next week. We'll see you then.